Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Also, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to the International JavaScript Conference. It's a pleasure to be in London again. My name is Marcos Iglesias, and I'm Senior Software Engineer at Eventbrite, where I build user interfaces and dashboards for our event organizers. I also manage our client-side performance monitoring, helping teams improving their user-perceived performance. On top of all that, I enjoy writing about software, giving talks, and maintaining BrightChat, an open-source chatting library based on D3. However, today I'm going to talk about performance budgets. Web performance has a lot to do with the user experience, bounce rates, and conversion rates of our sites. Web performance is important, and there are many stakeholders and considerations when dealing with it. Constantly arguing between design, product, and engineering about every feature that needs to be built is kind of hard, and this process can go wrong, which results in delays, feature creep, frustration, and ultimately inferior products for your users. Now, imagine you could have the whole team working with web performance in mind. One way you could have this is by tracking performance budgets. Whether you are a freelancer, working in a startup, or in a large-scale product company, performance budgets will help you sell web performance to your team, leadership, and clients. And they allow you to make quick decisions with a clear reference point. So what is a performance budget? Let's see my definition. Performance budget is a set of values for web performance metrics which, agreed by engineering, product, and design, defines the minimum web experience that your users will enjoy. It serves as a reference point for making decisions about feature inclusion, deprecation, update, or removal. So why should you use performance budgets? To answer this question, let me start with a story. In the past, at Eventbrite, I found myself seeing how teammates were improving the site. Maybe they were optimizing JavaScript bundles, or they were cleaning all assets, or building features such as server-side rendering. However, nobody was noticing those changes and those improvements. And that was really frustrating. And it was a pain because this lack of visibility and recognition, it was demotivating developers to do the right thing. Tracking performance budgets helps to make those improvements visible and will force your team to work with web performance in mind. And the first to notice this change will be your users, because they won't have to close your site because they lack the patience to wait for it to load. And not only users will benefit. For web engineers, tracking performance budgets will help to compare different solutions to a problem. Performance budgets will highlight the download, processing, and code parsing time that different vendors or frameworks will add to the site. And they are also a tool for translating the work of engineers into visible business value. For designers, performance budgets will show the limitations of less effective designs, because knowing the boundaries will help designers find more performance-friendly solutions. For product managers, performance budgets will help to prioritize features and understand how they contribute to the final user experience. Using performance budgets, product managers will have a measure to push for improvement campaigns, mapping them to lower bounce rates, improved retention, and more conversions. And finally, for engineering managers, performance budgets will help to keep the team accountable and to track the process of the progress of improvements. Okay, so how can you use performance budgets? Essentially, your team will measure every decision against the performance budgets. And it is key to create those performance budgets early in the project lifespan, because the effects of the budgets will guide through the development. Here you can see a speed curve dashboard that is tracking the speed index of 3 pages. Also, you can see this red line here is the performance budget, and it's in this case 3 seconds. So when a page like this one goes over the budget, then you can do 3 things, as Steve Souders from Speed Curve advises. You can either optimize an existing feature or asset on the page, remove an existing feature or asset, or simply don't add the new feature or asset. This is brutal and straightforward, right? For example, your team could decide to use an SVG instead of downloading an image. Or they can choose to use a lighter JavaScript framework instead of a weighted, more fashionable one. Or maybe it's just a matter of updating your JavaScript framework. So you just saw what are performance budgets, the reasons for using them, and how to use performance budgets in your day-by-day. Now we are going to explore different strategies to set performance budgets, which metrics you can track, and some real-world examples. The first strategy for setting performance budgets is to beat your competitors. This is one of the most common approaches, and it starts with measuring your competitors' experience. You can create a performance budget by running your competitor's site through web page tests and choose values so you can beat them. And in case you are wondering what does it mean to beat them, there is a quantitative way to measure it by using the 20% rule. So this rule states that for your users to be able to perceive an improvement between more performant and less performant experiences, the difference in speed should be no less than 20%. Below that point, your users will think that both sites are equally fast. So for example, if your site loads in 2 seconds, your users will only perceive an improvement if it starts loading in 1.6 seconds or less. Being faster than your competitors is easy to conceptualize, and will also be a compelling strategy to sell to your team and leadership. After all, who doesn't want to beat that other company? It is also a great approach if you need the sign-off from your clients or management. However, you will need a system to keep track of your competitors so that your performance budgets evolve with them. The next approach to set performance budgets is to improve the current experience. This is an excellent approach if you're developing a redesign or a code rewrite. You can do a performance audit of the different page types of your site and create your new performance budgets by reducing those values by 20%. Another way to set performance budgets is by following industry guidelines. Perhaps this approach is the best one when you have an entirely new product that you're building from scratch. In this line, you could follow human-computer interaction guidelines based on response times, such as those published by Jakob Nielsen in his book, Usability Engineering. More recently, we have seen Google's Chrome team expose a model for web performance they call Rail, which is based on setting goals for the different type of actions that users perform within web applications. The last approach I want to mention is to optimize business value for the company. This is a high-focus way of setting performance budgets. To implement it, first, you will identify the most critical parts of your site. They could be the landing page, a product listing, or maybe the checkout flow. Then, you will set performance budgets on those key sections and try to improve them by 20%. Later, you will release it to your users. Evaluate the impact through business metrics through analytics or A/B tests, and repeat the process. Here is a summary of the strategies. You could use one or combine them as needed. The critical part here is that you tie the budgets to the goals and business objectives of your team. This will help you get in the buy-in of executives and leadership so you can get more resources or maybe kind of have a budget of time to improve web performance. Cool. So now that we saw different strategies, we can talk about web performance metrics. Measuring web performance is kind of hard. These web performance metrics have been a source of endless discussions. And in today's performance world, this is still an ongoing conversation as the community keeps on adding new and more meaningful metrics to the mix. So as we see that maybe every year we have a new one. So kind of sometimes it's a little bit hard to keep track of them. In the next section, I will briefly talk about some metrics you could use and order on groups based on the work of Team Cadleck. The first metric group is quantity-based metrics. They are based on raw values. So these are conceptually super easy to understand. So they could be, for example, the number of HTTP requests, or it could be resource weight, like images, styles, JavaScript, or HTML. These metrics describe the browser experience, and they are not directly related to the user experience. So when we analyze what they are good or bad for, they're great for raising alarms about the site performance. So for example, something like, hey, we are downloading 2 megs of JavaScript, or if it's 3 or 10, it kind of is easy to make a slogan from that. And they're also easy to track. However, they're not telling you anything about the user perceived performance, which is the aspect that you really need to care about. Another group of metrics is the rule-based scores. They are generated by applications and browser extensions, and their output is a single or a series of scores to your site. So the earliest example of this category was Why Slow of Yahoo, and then it was followed by Google's Page Speed Insights back in the day, and more lately Lighthouse, which was at first a Chrome extension, and now you can find integrated in the Audits tab in the Chrome DevTools. My favorite application, Web-Based Test, also includes a grade system, although it's not kind of the central metric for them. A good thing about these metrics is that they focus on scores, which are easy to communicate, measure, and track. So when you have from 0 to 100 and you are in 50, then more or less you know that you're kind of in the middle, right? And if you have 99, then you're doing really well. So it's easy to communicate. They also provide, and keep track of them as well. They also provide action items to improve the performance of the page, helping you to create a performance improvement roadmap for your team or for your company. Sadly, they also measure the browser experience. So even if they include more metrics to give an overall view of web performance, they are not centered on user experience. And maybe you could make a small exception here for Lighthouse because it gives you actually some user-centric metrics that we will see later. The next group of metrics are milestone timings. These are usually time-based metrics reported by the browsers. You can find them in the Network tab of your browser's developer tools. So examples of milestone timings are page load, DOM content loaded, and time to first byte, which gives you a good measure of your backend speed. The newest metric in this group is time to interactive, which tells you the time when a page is ready for users to interact with it. It is a really useful metric to use in pages that focus on interaction, like web forms or web applications. In web-based tests, they call it first interactive. And now also we can get its equivalent when doing real user monitoring is first input delay. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. These metrics do describe the user experience, and they are easy to track as well. They tell you when the milestone triggers, but that's not the whole picture. What the users see between milestones is not recorded on these metrics. And that is where the rendering metrics come in. Rendering metrics try to tell you what the users experience and what they see. There are a bunch of them, and the most popular is the speed index. Pat Minan created a speed index as part of web page tests to measure how the page shows its contents to the user. A definition of a speed index from the documentation is this one. The speed index is the average time at which visible parts of the page are displayed. This measurement describes better the user experience of the site, and it depends on the user viewport. And this makes sense, right? If you're in mobile or in desktop, you're seeing different elements, so that speed index needs to be different. Another rendering metric is start render. And this is a metric that triggers when the browser renders the first non-white content to the user. Google calls this first pane as well. Let's see an example of these metrics in a web page test film strip. So here you see the start render. So it's the first time that we have something that is not white. And then the speed index is going to be more or less here, when most of the above the fold part of the screen is filled with content. It doesn't need to have all filled with the ultimate content, but most of the screen needs to be filled. Cool. So tracking rendering metrics, you'll discover how users experience the load of above the fold content of your site. They are excellent metrics, but they are not perfect, again. One problem is that they give the same weight, the same value to all the pixels. So if you have pop-ups or you have ads, those will be taken into account when calculating the speed index. And that's a problem because that's not what your users were trying to see on your site. Also, they still don't give you a complete picture because they don't measure interactivity. So for example, imagine that you have a web application that renders super fast. Maybe you have server-side rendering and it renders the content really fast. So it will have a speed index that is really good. But the problem is that maybe that application will spend a lot of time downloading JavaScript bundles that they need to parse, and then it will need to start the application. And that could take a lot of time. So all this time, the users won't be able to interact with the page. And this issue won't be highlighted by rendering metrics. This case is where custom metrics shine. Custom metrics are events that you will trigger manually or programmatically from your application when something important on your user's experience happens. So that could be when the form is ready to be submitted or when a search box is ready to work. They are the most granular metrics, and you will use the Web Performance API to get them from the browser and report them to your service, maybe with a direct AJAX request, or maybe you can use Google Analytics as well. Great examples of custom metrics are the time to first tweet of Twitter. Maybe this was the first one to be public. And what they do is that they check when the users actually can tweet. So you go to twitter.com, and the moment that you are actually able to send a tweet, that's where the time to first tweet triggers. Also, Pinterest shared his own, the pinner wait time. And this one looks at the slowest load time for critical content on a page. And what is kind of the critical content? That's completely subjective. So custom metrics are a focused way of describing the user experience of your users. One problem, though, is that they cannot be compared, as they are set in a case-by-case basis. So Twitter and Pinterest, they cannot compare their custom metrics one to each other. It just doesn't make sense. However, the main drawback of these metrics is that they are not scalable, because triggering custom metrics for all the events that can happen on your site will be a little bit crazy and also time-consuming. A workaround for doing this is doing it by templates. So targeting different content types with generic template-based custom metrics. There is a new metric that tries to overcome both the pixel importance problem of rendering metrics and the scalability problem of custom metrics, and it's called Last Painted Hero. This was created by the team at SpeedCurve, and Last Painted Hero is a metric that indicates when the last piece of critical content was painted. This is an automatic metric, and it's calculated by taking the maximum of the largest heading time and the largest image time. So they're going to check on one side, how long does it take to load for maybe the H1, and if you have a hero image, they will take that time as well. Then they will calculate which one is the longest, and that's the last painted hero. Here's a summary of the metric groups we talk about. Now that we saw different strategies and metrics, we can talk about choosing values for your performance budgets. In general, you should favor metrics that show you information about the experience of your users. Try to improve when they see the content and when they can interact with it. And that's why my favorite metrics are time to first byte, to get the backend performance, last painted hero or speed index, to find out how the page renders, and time to interactive or first input delay, to know when the users can interact with your content. You will benefit from choosing thresholds that push you to create business value. You should use the conversions and analytics data to establish a feedback loop. And remember, performance budgets should not be carved in stone, and they should change along the business goals. Another factor to consider when setting performance budgets is the type of your content. Landing pages, home pages, product listings, video content, and web applications, they have all different use cases and require different strategies. So you will want to set performance budgets for each of these types of content. You also need to know your audience. That means, on one side, know their devices. You should check your performance in the most common devices for your users, as there will be massive differences between desktop, iPhone, and feature phone users. On the other side, you will need to know your audience network conditions. For that, it is useful to ask yourself questions like, is my audience checking my site while they are commuting on the train? Or do they visit my page from their Wi-Fi connection when they are working or at home? Also, now you can get some of this information by using navigator.connection.effective type. This is going to give you 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G information, and then you can send that to your servers or your analytics and kind of keep track of those network conditions. In the end, your performance budgets will be created taking into account the metrics that you want or you are able to track, your type of content, and your research on audience, devices, and network conditions. Now, let's see some examples of performance budgets, like the one proposed by Alex Russell from the Google Chrome team. There was a 5 seconds time to interactive for phones in the first load. Also, they were trying to do this on 3G, not in Wi-Fi. You can also read about a Smashing Magazine case study where they set a challenging goal for the speed index. There's less than 1 second. This was in 2014 when they optimized for the critical rendering path. That is, trying to put all the CSS, JavaScript, and HTML for the above the fold area of the site fitting into the first 14 Ks. And they actually kind of get to that. Sometimes it's a little bit more than 1 second, but most of the times it's less than 1 second. And again, know that when you are doing something like news or Smashing Magazine, where you're reading things, you're really interested on speed index because that's when people can consume that content. But if you are in a web application, then the time to interactive is usually a little bit more important. Cool. So I'm getting to the end of this presentation, but I don't want to finish without talking about tools to track performance budgets. There are several, and I will start with the free options. You can use sitespeed.io that enables you to set up whole infrastructure of testing for your site. It offers a complete set of reports that can keep track of speed index and custom metrics, and you will do it by using private instances of web-based tests. Also, you can choose to have those web-based test instances on different regions, so that you will get a little bit of information about how other people in other parts of the world are experiencing your site. You can also use Speed Tracker, which is a more lightweight solution that tracks speed index and sends you alerts. This option will work with a free web-based test account, although it will be limited to some checks per day. I think it's 250, something like that. But yeah, another solution you can try is the newly announced Light Wallet. Oops. Okay, sorry about this. Well, it was supposed to be a screenshot, but
That did not pass the performance budget.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, well, the idea is that last week we had Google I/O and they presented this Light Wallet. So this is on top of Lighthouse bot. So before we had Lighthouse, so remember, we have Lighthouse on the Chrome extension, then they move it into the DevTools and the Audits tab, and now you can have a CLI. Well, they have Lighthouse CLI, and now they changed the name to Lighthouse bot. That is a little bit confusing because there is a Lighthouse bot that is from Slack, so it's different. The thing is that this Lighthouse bot, if you have your project on Travis, you can hook it in the Travis CI, and then you can do checks on Travis with each build. Well, now they just presented this Light Wallet that's basically taking that information and creating performance batches on top of that. But right now it's pretty limited. It's just checking number of resources and the weight of resources. Because it's super new, I'm really optimistic that they're gonna extend it, and you could check maybe time to interactive or speed index or any other rendering metrics. But we'll see. We'll see pretty soon. I guess if there is a lot of people using it, it will be extended. But this is a great tool for checking your QA environment because it's kind of cheap, and you just can try to run it every time that you do a build. Then on the other side, we have subscription-based solutions. In this group, you can find Calibre, which adds to the mix some of the Chrome-specific metrics like time to interactive. And another pretty complete solution is Rigor. But my favorite of the paid solutions is SpeedCurve. Their service tracks speed index, time to interactive, last painted hero, and custom metrics, and provides a lot of useful data on their dashboards. They also offer a RAM, real user monitoring solution, that you can just contract on the side. And then you can mix both metrics. The lab metrics, that they are the ones that you check every day, and the kind of real user metrics. Whenever you need to choose between web performance tracking tools, you should probably consider first your available resources, second the priority you give to web performance, and for the third is the budget. So complete custom solutions like the ones that you can create with sitespeed.io will take time and resources from your team. This will be a good investment if you want to prioritize web performance. However, if you are more interested in lower budgets, or maybe you want to start small to solve some business value before going further and asking for more money, then SpeedTracker, Calibre, or Rigor could be great options. When dealing with high traffic sites, a speed curve and Rigor seems to be the best choices, with speed curve being the best of the bunch if you can afford it. Finally, for your side projects or hobbies, I would recommend SpeedTracker or sitespeed.io. And also, if, for example, you have an open source project, then you can hook Travis for free, and then you can start using Lighthouse Bot and Light Wallet to check your performance budgets. Okay, so we just got to the end of this talk, and I want to review with you what we saw today. Performance budgets are self-imposed limits to web performance which, employed by the team as a reference, help to create enjoyable user experiences. They serve all the components of a product development team, forcing them to take web performance into account. There are several strategies and metrics which allow your performance budgets to accommodate your content, audience, and technical limitations. And you can choose between free and paid options to keep track of them. Adopting performance budgets implies a workflow change. And like other organizational transformations, it will take some time and flexibility to figure it out. However, it's a challenge that you can overcome by using data to show progress, business value, and customer satisfaction. Let's go back to my experience at Eventbrite. Before, at Eventbrite, teams could track web performance, but they didn't know what that performance should be. Nowadays, we track performance budgets, which allows us to catch web performance regressions and get notified when they happen. We also have all the team in the same page regarding web performance. And on top of that, we are able to detect when an improvement is made, so we can recognize the work of engineers that made that contribution to the experience of our users. And here you have pictures of my peers Simon, Kyle, and Jonathan getting noms. That is the way that we recognize kind of some achievements within the team. And they got them for bringing down those chats. I want to encourage you to set some performance budgets. See how this works for your team and experience the benefits at first hand. I am sure you will enjoy this drama-free approach to web performance. Thank you. Cool. So you can check out the slides of this presentation here. And I think we have plenty of time for questions. Yes, please.
I'm curious, like, with the tools that you were showing, do they give options to like integrate with like TeamCity, for example, or some kind of Selenium or automated solution, so that can be run, every time you check in, some code, it runs that, so notifies you that if it goes over the budget.
Yeah. So the question is if the tools that I talk about, if they allow you to check on every build, right? Yes. So it's a little bit tricky. So you can do it in almost all of them. The problem with it is that some of them, they're going to charge you, the paid ones, they're going to charge you by checks. So that's a little kind of, it's interesting because if you do it with all your builds, on all your site, with all your builds, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So, for example, what we do at Eventbrite, we have a speed curve. We are super happy with them, but we only check on production with them. That's good, but it's not ideal because we are being reactive, right? So we push something to production, and if we break a budget, then we need to, hey, kind of point it to the team. They say, hey, can you kind of deal with this? But then we are reactive again. So like we already have that in production. So it's not ideal. So what we want to do right now is to try to plug another thing on our QA that's going to check. I don't know if you will have that same problem, but for us, our QA environment is not the same as the production environment. And we have another one that is staging that is more similar, still not the same. So probably one of those challenges is that you want to check the performance on your builds. You don't want to check them all the time because then your builds is going to be super long. But I guess it depends a lot on the case, right? If your builds are really, really short, then that's fine. Just check everything and it's going to be fine. But if your builds are taking more than half an hour, for example, and then you plug this in, and then you are adding that time on all the builds. So it can be problematic. Ideally, well, also we have Pinterest, they give a presentation where they explain what they do. And they check on all the builds, but they only check on some specific pages, only on the most critical pages for them. So they're going to keep on checking, and maybe they won't check on every build, but they will check every 20 builds, for example. They check, and then if they have a problem, they have another tool to try to bisect where the problem was introduced. And then when they find the commit, then they will reach out to the teams. So for me, that would be ideal. Sadly, they didn't release, they didn't open source the things that they were using, but more or less you could figure it out. It's just, it will take some work for sure. But yeah, ideally that's what we should do. We should check on production, but also we should check in our builds so that we don't actually push those performance regressions into our production side. But again, it's tricky. It's tricky to do, but ideally that should be the case. More questions? Yes, back there.
Speaking from perspective of startups, if you're building an MVP, how important is a performance budget? Does it make sense to have it for an MVP?
That's a good question. So the question is about startups. If you're building an MVP, how important it is to have your performance budgets there? So I would say that it's not super important, but I guess a little bit depends on how is your MVP, right? If you have only one page, because it's a good thing, right? Because it's a small product, then it's easier for you to actually check everything there. But because it's an MVP, maybe it's going to evolve a lot, and maybe it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time there as well, right? I think performance budget will make sense in the moment that it checks that your product is still usable, right? Maybe because you are doing an MVP, you're kind of trying to develop really fast, so maybe you can actually break it. So having something that checks on your production, checks that at least is working, or is working in a kind of a fairly normal way, that would be pretty useful. If I were in that case, maybe I would go and try one of those small things or free ones, like Speed Tracker, right? That one is going to check one of your pages, and it's going to send you an alert if it goes over a certain level. And I think that's pretty good for in that use case. It's free. You will work with a web page test with a free key, so those 250 checks, and that will be enough for you. So I think that could be a good approach. More questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned about the design that is more performant. Do you have an example
Yeah, so the question is about design that is more performant. So I mentioned, I think the one that is the key one is the SVG against the image, right? I think that's the one that usually push more for designers to do. It's like, okay, you have this big image. Why don't you do an illustration on SVG? And they love, actually, designers love to create their own illustrations. And I think that has actually looks a little bit better because it's personalized, right? It's not like a stock picture that you'd get somewhere. And it performs a lot better. And also, you can actually customize it a little bit, and you can animate it as well. You can animate pictures. So I think that's the biggest example, trying to do SVGs instead of images. Then another way would be to kind of, I guess that's the thing about carousels, right? A lot of people, yeah, they want to have the carousel, and then showing how instead of putting a carousel, just putting a kind of a feature content on the top, just pick one and do it, or maybe you can actually pick two, but then kind of do a randomized so of one or the others and A/B test it maybe. But being able to show them, like, okay, if you put a carousel, this goes this at this level. If you have just one feature content with one hero image, then it's a lot better, right? So being able to push that. And I think the performance budget thing is that, I don't know, when you care about performance, you are always kind of being the person that's behind people. Hey, can you improve this? Can you improve that? And sometimes can be a little bit draining for your energies, that being that person just following people, trying to make these things work. With performance budgets, you have that conversation once, you put the line, and the moment you draw the line, then it's like, hey, we agree to this, so you just need to do it, right? I don't know if you do Agile on your team, so it's like a team agreement. So you agree that you're going to have this level, so that's it. So everybody can call out all the team members or all the teams because they kind of surpass that. And it should be easy, right? It's not another conversation to have with them. We still have time for questions. Yes, please.
So for your team, when you guys decided to do performance budgets, was there any feedback from the rest of the company convincing everybody else? I'm curious if you had any struggle and how did you overcome that struggle?
Yes. So the question is about how you kind of fight the pushback of other people or part of the teams or from the company when you are setting the performance budget. So that's a great question because that's usually what it's about, right? It seems that web performance as a theme is half technical, half kind of a business scene. And then on the business part of it, it's always about influencing, right? And that's something that I've learned just with banging my head against the wall, right? So I think this comes down to influencing, especially first your product manager or your product owner, so that you can show them, hey, if we spend time on web performance, then we will get results. And I think this is the key thing, especially if you can, for example, something that happened at Eventbrite, right? So I was trying to push for web performance improvements, and there were some really, really low-hanging fruits. We had this page where we were downloading a lot of images, and we could just do a lazy loading of the images, and we will get a lot better performance, right? So I tried to do that. It was an A/B test, an experiment, and we just did that. And then we checked the bounce rates of the page, and it went down. It's just by lazy loading some images, right? So with that, you can time box your improvements. So say, I'm going to spend 2 days doing this. So then maybe your programmer will say, okay, 2 days is fine. I can work with that. So you do that. You improve that performance and you ship it. And if you can A/B test it or get information about it, and then you show that by spending 2 days, you got kind of a conversion rate, a higher conversion rate, or a better bounce rates, then you can actually, there's a tool, I haven't put it here, but there is a tool that translates performance into money. And that's something that at least executives they really, really like that thing. You know, you say, okay, it's not about I spent 2 days and I save you this amount of money. And they love it. So usually that works a little bit, and then just showing kind of conversion rates, bounce rates, all that. If you try to move it into money, for executives works great. For product owners, usually just the metric itself, just bringing down bounce rate, they already understand that. So yeah, I would recommend first try to just do small improvements that bring you a lot of benefits, or try to find the metric or the kind of improvement that is going to impact more the business metric that they are caring about. Because that's another thing, is like, what do you care about? Sometimes it's completely different. I don't know if your company, but in mine, sometimes our OKRs change, and then we were trying to improve this, and now we're trying to improve another thing. So maybe you are actually changing as well the metric that you care about.
Do you know the name of that tool? Performance to money conversion?
No. Yeah, it's a Google thing, actually. It's a Google thing. We saw it in Perf Matters, and yeah, I can. What I can do is I can find it and share it on my Twitter, and yeah, sure. This thing for me is kind of the key of all performance-related work. It's influencing non-technical people to make them understand that performance really matters, and it's super hard. It's harder than doing any improvement on your web performance. It's super hard. Cool. Okay, no more questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and enjoy your rest.